I've made lots of air dry clay creations, and today I want to share my must have materials for easy, beginner friendly projects. Starting with the clay, I mainly use these two brands, DOS and Creative Paper Clay. DOS dries faster and is heavier after it dries, so I like using it for trays. Paper clay is a bit softer and it dries slower, so I like using it for sculpting more detailed projects like charms for keychains. The work surface I use is craft mats. They're easy to find and affordable. Next is an X-Acto knife. They're great for cutting clay. I also use a thin blade, which is useful for cutting straight lines and scraping clay off the mat if it gets stuck. A rolling pin is essential for flattening clay, and I use chopsticks as a guide when rolling it out. Fancy clay guides exist, but they can be expensive. Chopsticks are easy to find, very useful, and the thickness they create is perfect for almost all of my clay projects. This silicone and dotting tool set is my most used for both air dry and polymer clay. I bought clay sets with tons of tools, but many end up untouched or barely used. For simple projects, I mostly rely on these and my hands for sculpting. Acrylic stamp blocks are useful for sculpting small items. After my creations dry, I sand them for a smooth finish. This step is optional, but if you do choose to sand, make sure to wear goggles, a mask, and work in a well-ventilated room. The next materials will vary depending on your project. If you're making keychains, you'll need findings like eye pins and jewelry pliers. For other projects, you might need magnets, pins, or super glue. For painting the clay, I use acrylic paint from Montmartre and folk art, usually in matte or semi-matte finishes. For paintbrushes, I get a set from Amazon or Michaels and replace them as needed. Sealing is important since air dry clay isn't naturally water resistant. I use clay varnish to seal my pieces since it's less toxic and easier to use than UV resin. It's also more affordable, making it a great option for beginners. If you choose to use UV resin, make sure to follow the safety precautions. Now that we've covered all the essentials, let's make some easy clay magnets. To start, we will need an outline. You can either print the design, draw it, or trace it. I used parchment paper and traced the design directly from my iPad screen. I'm using DOS, and I always knead my clay for a few minutes before use. If your clay is dry like mine, add a bit of water and knead until you reach your desired consistency. Now let's roll out the clay using the chopsticks and rolling pin. Now we can place the templates on the clay and use the X-Acto knife to cut around them. I'm smoothing out the edges using some water. I don't spend too much time on this step since I will be sanding them later. Now we can let these dry for 1 to 2 days depending on the thickness. Flip them halfway to ensure that both sides can dry. They are now fully dry, and now I can start sanding. I'm placing a wet tissue to catch the fine dust that falls, and as always, I'm wearing my mask, goggles, and working in a well-ventilated room. I'm using superglue to attach the magnet to the clay piece. Make sure to wear gloves and check the superglue packaging for any additional safety precautions. Painting small details can be hard, so I'm using a dotting tool to trace the face onto the clay. This creates a faint outline so I know where to paint. it's time to apply varnish. This varnish is thick, so I usually only need 1 or 2 coats. Make sure the first coat is completely dry before adding a second. We're done with the varnish, and here are the finished products. They turned out so cute and glossy.